Good morning. Welcome to the third day of the event Enhancing Relevance and Impact in Brazil for Research in Green Technology Management and Product Service Systems. We will now start the presentations. The first speaker is Professor Breno Nunes from Aston University. Professor Bruno will make a presentation about integrating PSS and green technology research into teaching.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. Big pleasure to be here. I could not start my presentation without actually thanking a lot our... Oh, it's pink. Anything against pink color? It's very... Oh, now it's green. Yeah, oh no. Green is better. Okay, all right. So I could not start differently, but thanking all the São Paulo team for their wonderful work in hospitality. It has been great, and I think, I personally have been enjoying these two first days very much indeed, and I'm pretty sure, I hope you enjoy the third day as well. Of course, I've got to thank also our colleagues at Aston University who did a fantastic job in supporting the organization of the event, particularly Andreas Schroeder, Panos and Dan for all their help in coming up here. And what would be the workshop without you guys? Taking all your time to cross the Atlantic, come over here, share your thoughts and be open to collaboration with Brazilian researchers. So a big thank you to you. I know that for some of you, it was a big decision. You had to negotiate with your families due to Zika virus, many concerns that you had. So I really, really appreciate all you coming over here. Well, what I'm going to do today, I'm going to be trying to share here some of the... Ooh, it's a bit pinky. Come on. Probably need the help of the IT guys. Yeah, I'll stop messing around with that. Yeah, good. So my objectives here today are pretty much just to start first sharing some views on how early career researchers can integrate research material, industrial collaboration, and teaching. So I call in research material because it's not just your research, but it's the research that you come across when you're developing your research and how you can integrate that into your teaching. Show a little bit of the experience we had at Aston in doing that. I will indeed focus more on my experience of doing that, but part of that will also include things that the center have been doing. Present on how the integration can happen with different types of methods, such as Harvard case method and some problem-based teaching style. And then finally, I hope that I can trigger your curiosity, and then you can share your views during the discussion. By the end of the presentation, I think we have a Q&A session after the British Council presentation. I did capture a lot of things that were being said in the first day and in the second day on how many of you were doing research but not teaching, on how many of you were actually doing both, and how you had the presence of industry involved with undergrad and postgrad students, bringing these external engagement into your teaching. So I'll bear that in mind as I go through. So my agenda, I will need to talk about Aston very briefly, just to put you in context on what is going on in the UK and on how that might also be coming to Brazil in a few years' time, the pressures that we are receiving to improve teaching, and if you do need to improve teaching, you might need to teach more or you need to teach better, and then that, of course, will impact on the time you have to do research and other things. So we need to do that very effectively, because and we probably also need to stop thinking that teaching is just a burden on us. You know, that we love research, and you know, we got to do teach because it's a necessary evil at universities. I would just try to show that, you know, there is lots of opportunity to integrate those. I will show some of my personal perspectives on what gaps I might there in PSS and in green technology, mostly on green technology. The forms of integrations that we can have, I mean, some of them are very well known by most of you, the case method and the problem-based. Well, Aston is part of this group. There's 1% of the university, of the business schools in the world that are triple accredited, and we are one of them. Pretty much, you know, it's a big universe of 4,000 business schools in the world, and, you know, Aston belongs to these triple accredited. And when you think of triple accreditation, what is happening is that these institutions, EQUIS, you know, AMBA, and the Association of the College of the Business Schools, they will be visiting periodically Aston to check the quality of our teaching. And it's simply, if we don't tick the boxes, they take the accreditation out. So they will talk to students, they will talk to staff, and one of the things that we promise in our website is kind of employability, and then our teaching actually instruct employability. So if we start slipping a little bit on our promises, if we start doing very kind of research that is not translated into our teaching, if we do not improve the employability of our students, we might lose our accreditation, because we are actually putting something on the website and we are not delivering that. We are very international, so when we are developing our research, there is an opportunity to explore these international links that we build with our students to do international research. That's another way of doing integration, if you think. But also, when we developing our research and our teaching material, we need to bear in mind that we're teaching probably 130 nationalities. So if we adopt cases, if we adopt material that is very UK-centric or European-centric, that may not make much sense for students. So we need to look at the accreditations that will pressurize us to teach the standard things. We need to bring up the new things because we want our students to be employable. But also, we need to do that looking at the international dimension on how, you know, the Chinese student, the Indian student, the Brazilian student, and, you know, probably American and Canadian going to understand that. It's a big challenge. Another thing that I would like to raise from these contexts where we are at Aston is that we like to portray ourselves very much as a research-led institution. And if you go to our website, if you just pass by our campus, you're going to see on the walls of Aston University, we are a research-led student. We don't tell anyone that we are actually teaching dependent financially, right? So we are into this dichotomy that we are research-led, we are on the top, we've been top 10 for a while, now we are top 20 in terms of research excellence as assessment in the UK, excellence framework now, but the majority of the universities in the UK and all over the world, they will be financially dependent from teaching. And that's the reality. And since there was a change in the tuition fees in the UK, students used to pay like £3,000, now they are paying £9,000 for their degree. Students are requiring more now. They are demanding more. And if we don't deliver good teaching, as you know, it does make sense. The students don't care if you are research-led. They care what they're learning. So these are the pressures. All right. A little bit about myself. So you know what I do research and what I teach. My area has always been operations management. I've done a production engineering degree from Brazil, and then I went to do a PhD in management in an operations management department in the UK in 2006. Became a staff member in 2009 and 2010. Became a permanent member of staff at Aston. My areas has also been since the undergrad with this model that we have in Brazil of funding research for undergrads with environmental management. So that is scaled up from looking at urban air pollution from the transportation modes to a more strategic side of green supply chains in my master's, and then in green operation strategy in my PhD. And now I'm on these areas on green operation strategy, technology management, sustainability strategies, all these kind of things. Well, of course, you do all your research and then you get a job. When you get a job, what are the chances that what you do in terms of research is going to be integrated to what you teach? Very little, right? They are hiring you because they want you to teach what they don't want to teach. That's the reality, right? You get a big professor, and they have their own agenda, and it's their responsibility to bring that new thing to the programs. So once they bring these new things, all this project management, the operation strategy, this traditional thing needs to be taught by somebody else. And that's usually the new guys. So you have all these conflict because you have done something that's supposed to be original in your PhD. You have the papers to publish, and then you've been asked to teach using books that are 20 years old. Well, I'm also Vice President for Education, Research and Publication for the IAMOT. So many of you know the IAMOT, and I'll be there in May also talking about case teaching in IAMOT. But the way I look on my research today and how I try to bring that into my teaching is that I try to look at the highest level where companies are interested, involved. So this could be at country level or region level, because I teach international operations, so that's on how actually my teaching impacts a lot on my research. So by teaching international operation, I was led to think on the behavior of organizations beyond one operating environment. And how these country environmental policies will tend to cascade to pressurize company behavior in terms of building up their environmental policy, and then finally, the individual values and behavior. So that's a little bit on how I see myself doing research. I see on how these translations, so I can work at the micro level or the macro level. Some of the publications, I'll not spend time on this, but you're going to see that there is a mix of traditional things like Kyoto partnerships or to the new staff green operation strategy. There is something that it's company-based strategy for sustaining competitiveness in manufacturing. There's things that are very theoretical at macro level, such as modeling sustainability performance to achieve absolute reduction in socio-ecological systems. So there is this blend, and this blend continues to exist in my pipeline. So my pipeline mix a couple of things that are traditional and a couple of things that are more linked to the new theoretical contributions that we need to make to get to 3- and 4-star journals papers. Well, my research supervision also, I open up my research supervisions to topics that are of my interest, but are not necessarily the mainstream of what I do. So I have a Thai student working on cloud and computing adoption. That's very strong on the technology side, but there is very little on the sustainability side of it. So once the projects start kicking off, if there is an opportunity for us to add an environmental dimension to it, we go in and do it. On the other hand, I have like energy service companies in China. I have a Chinese student working with me, which is pretty much a logic of selling energy as a service, and how you develop technology capabilities. I mean, I need to do very little to integrate sustainability there, because the companies are doing that for sustainability reasons. They want to reduce the CO2 emissions, and then the energy company, the energy service companies, is one of solutions that they are seeing. The problem is then how they develop the capabilities to develop to deliver that service. Again, the traditional stuff. Nat Sprego is a DBA student that works in Rolls-Royce, working with me on and with Tim Baines on the manufacturing strategy formulation. Because of my interest in development of research here in Brazil. I've got 3 PhD sandwich students at Aston. So, I mean, Barbara is still there. Barbara is here from University of São Paulo, from FEA. Minelli spent 1 year last year, is back now he was from Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. Now he is working at Unifor. And Denise from Rio Grande do Sul. And then Petruska is coming from Natal, from Federal University of Rio Grande do Norte, to look at green technologies in higher education institutions. So there is an opportunity for also to do collaboration and to merge, through these programs. This funding is already available here. And that's also how I'm trying to do that. So I look at myself and then what I've been doing in terms of research belong to 3 very distinct domains, and these people sometimes don't talk to each other. So the technology management community, the sustainability community, and the operations management. So as I said, I do some pretty standard stuff from an operations management perspective, which is operations strategy and internationalization. But once you put that in, and then you look at the interface related to sustainability, what I'm doing is actually green operation strategy, where if you put that in context with the technology management, it's green technology management. That applies to everything. Okay, so here we go. We are in a situation now. I have spoken about the increase of tuition and fees, and on how that impacts on the increase of demand from students. The students will not be happy if they are paying more and getting the same, right? But there are other things that are happening in business schools in the UK and all over the world that we need to bear in mind. And one of them is the principles of responsible management education. So as part of the accreditation, many of these schools, they are being pushed to discuss ethics, to discuss sustainability issues in the undergrad and the postgrad courses. And you need to adapt that. On how you're going to adapt that, that's up to the institution. And I will talk about that in a bit. Market employability, I have already spoken about that, so I'll skip. Bringing these new research, should make our students more employable. Students that know about PSS prior to getting to the market should be in a better position. And also, there's new routes for promotion. Because of the teaching excellence framework, which is the version of the research. So the rankings that we had for research are now appearing very much for teaching as well. I mean, we already had teaching rankings that were given by the newspapers, The Guardian, The Times, Higher Education. But now, this is going through a government scheme to assess the universities based on the quality of that teaching. And it's called the Teaching Excellence Framework. And with that, some universities will need to reward people who do good teaching. So it might be an opportunity to go for promotion via teaching excellence. And of course, in the end of the day, what also you want to do is you want to look at the student experience and how you can change the experience of student in learning at the university and also make your job a little bit more joyful, right? If you're teaching the same thing for 5 years, you're going to be bored. If you're bored, God knows what the student's going to be like in the classroom. So the question I put here is that if research-led is actually, it's what we need in terms of content and delivery to meet some of these demanding, particularly in terms of market employability and the principles of research, responsible management education. So if we think of PSS and sustainability, we have PSS very strongly linked to employability, and we have sustainability and the green technologies very strongly linked to the responsible management education. So the integration there, it probably starts by assessing what you have. Let's say in terms of industrial collaboration, what can you do? I mean, what are the guest speakers that you're currently using? Do you perform some technical visits during the courses? Do you explore the context via the alumni? I know that American universities are very good at alumni. The UK is at least tracks the students. And there are some activities going on trying to attract funding from the millionaires that that leave the university afterwards. They become millionaires, and then why not just returning a little bit back to the university? Consulting work that we do, the industry clubs. I mean, the team Baines have been very successful in creating the industry clubs. So a group of industries go along, and then they finance part of the research. They, they pay for seminars, all these kind of things. And then from the research side, of course, you're building up new theories. But whether those theories are actually suitable for teaching or not, it would be better if you start with a teaching mentality than if you produce the theory and then you try to adapt later. If every time you have checkpoints when you're doing research, say, can I actually teach my undergrads with this? Because if you cannot teach your undergrads, how are you going to make impact policy, right? We all know that our undergrad students tend to be more intelligent than our politicians. So if our undergrad students cannot understand what you're teaching, it's very difficult that people in industry or to impacting policy are going to be much harder, right? Well, teaching. Then there's also this feedback loop, because when you're teaching, you're being explored now to angles that might not be on the very safe boundaries of research, and that could just bounce back for you to locate companies to improve your industry collaboration, or new areas that you may want to do teaching. And also, let's not forget, at Aston, the students do the first and the second year, and then they go for a placement year. They spend 1 year in the company, and they come back to the final year. So this year, I have already been to Mini in Oxford, a BMW-owned company, and also I'm visiting another 2 students. So that's an opportunity to meet the manager, to talk about research and all these kind of things. So if you have a research mentality when you're doing these activities, then that's an industry access that comes almost for granted because you're involved in teaching. So some of the gaps that might be worth exploring that probably have a very strong value for both research and teaching. Yes, I think the first day we did, when Andy did his presentation, there was a very nice debate here about the B2B or B2C models that you have with PSS. And, think of students, most of the students are able to have that discussion and might be able to collaborate, even to collect data if you want. Some of the products that we are thinking of designing, the students are users, they're customers. The product service composition, how much of product, how much of service you have. And also another thing that it's strongly didactical, very good, very interesting. It triggers curiosity of students. It pushes the students to have analytical thinking. And we in research, we haven't been able to discover that yet, because it changes according to the country, it changes according to the segment, and so on. The mindset and capabilities. Again, the strategic perspective, the role of stakeholders, business context, all of that goes into actually suitable for both areas. And in terms of green technologies, the areas that are more of the ecological side of sustainability in terms of the planetary boundaries or essentiality of goods and services, ecosystem services. We know that companies like Puma are now looking at the valuation of the impact on ecosystem services and how they actually impact on this. Ecological balance sheets, that's what they've been doing. And this is a pretty interesting thing to do, mainly if you're in engineering now. Like in business, it might be slightly more difficult to do unless you're teaching environmental accounting. But from an engineering perspective, to look at the models, to look at the math behind that, I think it's a pretty interesting research for both research and teaching. Well, some of the things I've developed from my PhD were based on looking at how drivers impact on the development of the environmental strategy or green operation strategy, because it's mostly limited to the operations function, and on what is the priority or the risk level that you have every time you try to adopt one of these practices. Because at least 5 years ago, what I would do is that I would teach all of these in isolation. But then you go to the company and then you learn that the company is actually making choices. So these practices are competing against each other. And they might have different values when they go to different countries. So when I teach my international operations students, what I'm showing is like, okay, it might be easy to do this very much in Germany because the infrastructure is there. There are trains or electric trains, so you can reduce the CO2 emissions from your logistical systems. But if you are in a place like in the US or in Brazil, which is very road-based work, then road-based transportation, then the carbon intensity of the logistical system is going to be very high. So then you have a much bigger trade-off if you have a plant far away from suppliers or far away from the customers, depending on what you need it to be. But again, these are things that have been refined after the research in order to adapt them for teaching. So it didn't start as simple as that, you know. It was a process that has been emerging on trying to adapt the research results, not just based on the rejections you get when you submit papers, but also on the ability to transform this into teaching material. Well, think of a very well-established operation strategy framework, and then I was actually delivering a course to IBM a couple of weeks ago, and you look at these things, right? And then it's capacity, it's supply, it's process, and it's development in organization. I mean, transversally, what you can do is say, okay, all right, let's now green up all these strategy process. Let's see that when you're making location decisions, when you're thinking of the size of the site, what are the pressures or values that you need to take into account? What are the challenges and opportunities? When you're thinking of your supply chain, same thing. When you're thinking of your processes, the same thing. And then the product development and organization, the same thing. Are you going to, through the organization here, are you creating a job, a chief or sustainability officer to really show the key stakeholders that you're serious about it? Or are you just leaving it at an environmental middle management level, environmental manager, environmental supervisor? So sometimes, it goes all the way up here to actually deliver the change. Well, again, everybody knows this, right? This is the standard way we teach products and services. We look at it. I know that Enrique Correa has a very good paper on showing them, rather than looking at these at binary, intangible or tangible, but looking at the degree of tangibility of products and services, what you can do is that you can transform this, which is very theoretical, very dry, into an analytical debate in class, in which you say, okay, guys, you're now part of Google, and what are the products that you can come up, because Google is a service company. So now you're making the reverse process. You have a service company trying to manufacturize, and then you have a manufacturer who is trying to servitize. But what is the middle ground there? That's a wonderful discussion for our students. Or you can get supermarkets that they are creating their own products. So what are the challenges now of Tesco, or Carrefour, or Pão de Açúcar, to come up with their own brands of coffee? I mean, do they have the capability to manage suppliers? Do they know anything about agriculture? Do they know anything on how they can actually, are they doing a joint venture? Are you doing acquisition? All the business context now comes alive. Rather than just teaching, in a very dry way, what is a product and a service and what is a product service system, you can engage the students in trying to find a solution. So you can say, go to the supermarket, look at the price, try to identify the products that you think are suitable for a higher integration, and then think what are the challenges that you can do in terms of building up your supply chain, verticalizing it, and having a high level of control. What are the drivers? Is it supply variability? That's why you're doing. That's why you're buying your supplier and controlling the supply chain flow, because you want to guarantee supply. Or is it a cost-based approach? Is it a quality-based approach? Then all the strategic issues comes aside again. Is it a speed issue? Good. On this side, again, we can always think, what are the challenges, or for companies like Xerox to bring a B2B business model they already have to a B2C, right? So would these students be happy to rent or to buy or to actually just to rent a photocopier? What is the cost of that? if an inkjet. I mean, you can just go to Tesco and then you can buy one for 50 quid, 50 pounds. So you see the challenge now, rather than just speaking on them. Well, so integration. Any questions so far? Any comment that you want to make? So I take a sip of water. Well, the integration. I tend to think there's integration as in four main areas. Four main, actually, there's 5 modes over there, but that's decisions that you've got to make belong to 4 main types of decisions. First, whether going to be a transversal integration, which is, I think, is the best one for early career researchers, because you're going to be put on your table to teach things that you didn't choose and you didn't develop. And anything that you do in the beginning of your career, if you offer to another course, it will probably not offset the previous one. So you're gonna just be teaching more in the beginning of your career. So it's a very important thing, because in the beginning of career you're being pushed to produce papers, and then you have a very recent research, which is your PhD. So all of a sudden, if you're trying to integrate your research through the different methods, you increasing your teaching load will actually impact your ability to produce the papers. And if you're in the US, that's critical because of tenure. If you are in the UK, that's critical in terms of your promotions. If you are in Brazil, you might just get into a teaching mode that you never come back to research. Of course, you can create these specialized modules, and that needs to be in alignment of what the institution wants. And you can even create specialized degrees, so which, puts the design of the course in a much easier way, because you're starting from scratch. Much more challenging process, but we've done that in 2 courses that I will talk in a minute. And also, what is the type of changes that you want to make, mainly in terms of the transversal integration, whether they're going to be incremental changes or radical changes. Most of those relate to design and content. And in the second part of my presentation, I will touch on the delivery and the assessment, which are the components that need to be thought in the process of designing and establishing the content. Because if you don't do that, it might be disjoint. So in terms of transversal integration, actually, that was my pitch to get the job. I said, if you hire me, I can green your courses. I can put the content. And then what I did was, I ran the course in the first year pretty much the same with a little bit of green. And then I got the student feedback. And the student feedback said, wow, this green thing is really good. But the macroeconomics in the beginning of the course, it just overlaps with things that we've learned in year 2 and with the other courses we've taken. So brilliant, cut the macroeconomics. Yeah, I got the macroeconomics out. Rather than having 4 lectures on macroeconomics or international operations, I reduced that to 2, and then I put that to the green. In project management, so that was pretty much a blank canvas for me, because I got that course and then said you can do whatever you want. I follow up the methodology, which was action learning, but what I did is I brought the environmental department of Aston to set up a smart and eco-campus scheme for students to develop projects. So the students had to actually come up with ideas to green the Aston University campus, and they were presenting to the environmental department later. Specialized modes, we haven't done that yet. We went to actually creating new degrees, because we noticed that we had expertise in social responsibility and sustainability, so we create a MSc program. It's in its year 5 now, so we're going to redesign it, but we have been quite successful in attracting distant learning students. So we got, in these 5 years, we've got probably more than 50 students all over the world: Australia, Canada, US, countries in Africa, Asia, in the UK as well, and Europe. So we have a very good international cover, because we are going through distant learning mode. And there's the MSc in Service Innovation also, because the expertise start building up, and then there is no place to put into the existing degree. So all these things, the school things that Panos and Andy and Dana are doing in terms of gamification or IT, these needs to go into this a new degree program, because there is no space of putting on the existing ones. And incremental, the way I look at incremental and radical changes is I go year by year just changing cases, adding one in a very safe place, you know, and then I do a big change after reflecting on how these small changes are actually saturated and I cannot change the logic of the module anymore. With project management, again, there are two venues that you can explore. You can explore on how project management philosophy can impact on sustainability projects. So you can get a number of very good initiatives, full of goodwill, but extremely with a very high level, lacking robustness or lacking basic things that in business we know. These are people who come from philanthropic background, know very little about business processes, on risk management, and they try to implement environmental or sustainability projects. But then you can use this body of knowledge to help them out. Or you can get the sustainability values, and then you can actually introduce into the traditional projects in order to try to green them up. This is the path I took with the international operations to show all these small incremental changes and on how these sometimes really takes time for us to change things. You know, I became involved with the module in 2007, and I developed a case with Dave Bennett. It was actually a case of BMW and Chrysler coming here to Campo Largo in Paraná to build up the Tritec Motors joint venture. And that case, you know, became part of the syllabus. It was being used in the tutorials, and I started running the majority of the tutorials as a graduate assistant, a teaching assistant. And then in 2009, I became module leader as a teaching fellow. And then I did already a change in the coursework to group work to see, because the numbers of students were actually scaling up. So I started the course 2007 with 90 students. In 2009, I already had 220. So imagine my time for research that I had planned in a year. I moved up, you know, and increased in 1/3, probably the time I had to mark if I had individual assignments. In 2011, I got help. So Chris Owen joined the module. And then, you know, we start sharing 50-50. So everything I was doing at that time need to be very careful now, because I'm not delivering the module alone. So it needs to be things that is done, able to delegate and share, that people can do at the same quality as you. Or actually, they can work on the same page in terms of discussing the method, sitting down prior to delivering the course. All these kind of things becomes a little bit of teaching work. I mean, that's the year when the module became probably the most popular year for the module. We got like 207 students. So about 207 students in the same classroom. And then we had to teach these students. I mean, the undergrad office came back to us saying that because of the number of students are too high, we need to increase the number of tutorials. The problem that we had is that the attendance in the tutorials were very poor. The tutorials are at 9 o'clock in the morning. So imagine you waking up -2 in the UK. You look at the sky through the window. It's very grey in Birmingham. And then you think, oh, should I have a tutorial with Breno? No. Snooze the alarm and keep sleeping, right? So the attendance in the tutorials are very poor. And then we are running these sessions in three consecutive sessions. So imagine how boring that was for us. So it was boring for the students, boring for us. So let's come up with a solution. So in 2014, we eliminate these tutorial sessions. And then we moved from 1 hour lecture to a 2-hour lecture. In this 2-hour lecture, I got part of my research material and part of and I start building up stronger cases that I could actually now have a discussion with 200 students in the class in a meaningful way. So 1 hour lecture, 1 hour case discussion with a larger group. We said, wow, the students like that. The feedback came, you know, pretty strong. So in 2015, we said, well, now it's time to do a radical change again. So what we did in 2015 is, because we had the experience of the other course in teaching distant learning students, we start using Adobe Presenter and putting the voice over the slides to work with new cases and to put the learning about the theory outside the classroom. So the students need to prepare for the case when they come to the lecture, and all the material they have to learn the theory is outside the classroom. So when they click to watch these slides, there is actually my voice behind it, which is not very nice, but it seems to be working so far. Well, once you do these changes for moving from a traditional lecture style to case teaching style, we need to think of the assessment modes. And then we had to change the coursework as well. We now work with long cases for the assessment, so it's not anymore small cases, because we want to test the ability of the student of actually understanding the business context and applying the theory there. I have already spoken about that on actually doing teamwork, working with people that deliver the module with you, and people who do, who kind of know about your work, but may not be working on the same course with you, to pick up the best ideas and do that. There might be, the idea that this Harvard case method is a method that they use in Boston, and that's it, And in fact, Chris went to attend a Harvard case method seminar. He delivered, a certificated, let's put it that way, delivered by Harvard. And the first thing that he was told is, there is no such a thing as a Harvard teaching method. Everyone in Harvard teaching the way they want in terms of the cases. I mean, they adapt it according to the audience. So that's the first lesson we've got to learn. Are actually these students as active students? Do they have much time to read the material prior? What is the previous knowledge that they have? All of that impact on the selection of the cases, on the way you deliver the cases, the questions you put, and so on. We did kept some key characteristics. So the interactive discussion, learning by doing, requirement for preparation. In these beautiful auditorium that we have, we tend to put the name of the students in front of them, so we call them by the name. So it's 200 students, but I'm able to create a personal rapport by calling them by the name. Assessment is now in exam, I've spoken about that, but we did a couple of things. We didn't want to scatter students. And also, we didn't want to take the risk because we didn't have the experiences the first year we were doing. So we didn't grade them based on the participation. But that's something that will come because all the students at Aston have a swipe card to get into university. So what we're going to do is that we're going to put the swipe card in the door, and then everybody needs to swipe their cards to come into the classroom. So we get attendance automatically from swiping the card, and then with the names, we can get someone with teaching support to grade the participation of the students. I will skip this. This is too, Aston replays just the same way you're recording this, we do that at Aston. It seems to work well with case, but students will, if you focus on the case, students will learn. And they will get very quickly, by week 3, they will understand what is the module about. Because there is always this accent that students will not read, they will not prepare, students are the same, they just change their address, regardless of the country you are, they're going to be the same. And, it's not true. If you go there, you go with the proposition and say, listen, there is the case, forget about the textbook, forget about the reading list, focus on the case. And of course, they're going to start getting anxious about whether they're learning the theory for the exam or not. So you can always, in the end of the case discussion, bringing up the theory a little bit. Say, listen, we are talking about product development today, and look what you've learned. Look at the theory. Did we cover this? Did we cover this? So that reduces the anxiety of the students. Well, some of the cases I have developed with at Aston, these were a Tritech, which is a joint venture in Brazil, Natura, which, a spin-off from the workshop last year. Many of them actually using secondary data. The NHS supply chain, in Pakistan, Think electric cars, Gillette going to the Indian market, Chiquita banana in Central America in development now. And I've been doing some case research, and that shows, some of the case research. The thing is, the research case that we have they need to be tailored sometimes as a teaching case, because with the research case, what we're trying to get to be publishable is to show your analytical skills. So it needs to be very explicit in this causal relationship between a driver, an adoption, and performance, for instance. And what you might want from the students is actually that to test their analytical skills. So sometimes if you're designing a teaching case, you might want to leave a couple of things implicit to see if the students can pick up a connection between behavior and attitude, or driver and action and performance. Also, with a research case, you want to build theory. With the teaching case, what you might want is actually you want the student to apply the theory. You want to recognize very well, in the end of the paper, the research limitations. But what you want in the teaching case is to explore what are the future decisions. Should the company do this? Should the company, what direction should they do? Was there a right decision or wrong decision? All these kind of things. And then the research case, it's actually a flag of your research expertise, and the teaching case, it's focused on the learning aspects for your students. You must be very clear with the teaching material that you've built up in terms of teaching cases, that these cases are not portraying good or bad practice from the organizations, but in fact are a tool for you to learn. Again, now an example for me to finish my presentation, some examples with toy models. Again, a fantastic tool for both research and teaching. So I get one of those. You can see, how the things are changing all over the world with the Inclusive Wealth Report on how institutions now are trying to assess the wealth of the countries beyond the GDP. Then we can explore the change of paradigms, from moving from triple bottom line to a systemic approach, looking at thresholds, looking at system dynamics. Build up system dynamics models on how, using the theory that you have, show these. This is a pretty dry stuff, right? What I'm showing is that these are on the paper. If you put this paper on the reading list for the students and ask the students to read, how many of them are actually going to read? How many of them are actually going to understand the whole thing there? What you can actually do is that you can just get a game and say, come on, become a mayor of this city, play the game, come back to discussion and tell me, what was your score? How many times did you learn? So this is this electricity game. How many of you have heard about electricity? Yeah, Panos, because I told you. So that doesn't count. So electricity is, you become a mayor of a city, and then you developed the city based on 4 main criteria. So you've got to keep the people happy, you've got to grow the population, you should not go bankrupt, and then you should not pollute. Oh, you've got to pollute within levels. So of course there are clear trade-offs. When you build an aluminium smelting plant, the population skyrockets. The taxes that you get in terms of revenue are very high, so the chances of going bankrupt are very low. But pollution level, and then the noise, and then the pollution makes people very unhappy. So students need to, throughout the life of the city, they need to balance these things. And there is a clear idea of thresholds. Mainly the limitations are the land. You cannot grow land in this city. You can see population shrinking, and whether that's good or bad. That's, again, another discussion. This is a model I also have to run the toy model. And again, you can present that, very beautiful, students going to look at, and then if they don't apply, they don't learn. So rather than doing that, you can just bring this into more action learning type of methods. You ask the students to make a list of the electronics that they use these days, try to map the purpose, the function, and then try to think of the essentiality. Whether they are essential, non-essential, whether they are, useful, and so on. And again, that bounces back to research. I got 400 students from the UK, 200 students from Brazil, and that's some of the results we've got. We tested about 70 items. And then you can see some obvious thing. The need for heating in the UK is much higher than in Brazil, right? In the same way, the need for air conditioning. These are the obvious things, but there are other things that are not very obvious, like tumble dryer, dishwasher, tablets. That might be explained by that might be explained by affluence. Yeah, might be income. But toaster is cheap in both countries. So why the UK love more toasters than the Brazilians? I mean, it's something intriguing. The car. We all talk about improving the urban infrastructure and how that will reduce the car dependency. But it actually shows, that cities were Birmingham and Porto Alegre, and Birmingham has probably a much better train systems, bus, than Porto Alegre. It's far more walkable than Porto Alegre, but still, it's a pretty close the way that both students actually look at the essentiality of the car. In the end, we tested also for gender, and for your surprise, women tend to think that chocolate is more essential than men. And men tend to think that games consoles are more essential than women. And that's pretty much all I had for you. Thank you very much indeed. I look forward to hearing your experiences in doing this.